Hello, everybody. I hope you're well tonight. I'm doing as well as can be expected, considering all the various messes that I spend time learning about. Anyway, I hope you've had some happiness today. It's important to have that in spite of everything. I'm going to share for a few moments so some people on Facebook can find out that we're on. And then in a minute or two, I'll be checking in with you. So thank you for being patient. Not even sure where I sent that one to. Okay, hopefully that'll do for tonight. And here we are. Here I am. I hope you don't mind the light behind me. And Dolores says good evening and hello from both Facebook and YouTube. Lana says hi, folks. So Lana, I hope your move went well. That was yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. And Dolores says sharing. Go Start says hola. He says, got here by myself tonight. Ghost Art says, Devora, Hibiscus, Firestone, CPAC at Devora, F-Star, Nancy Pelosi betrays progressive lawmakers. Of course. Yeah, I saw that. That was from David Doel, if I'm not mistaken, otherwise known as the Rational National. Corstart says Progressive Caucus caves in 3-2-1. Have they caved, Steve? Last I heard, they were standing firm. They're supposed to have 65 people ready to stick it out. Lana says, still moving. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Lana. That's never fun, I don't think. Okay, please do share, everybody. As you know, the topic for tonight is best immediate solution to the debt ceiling crisis. So, I'm going to go through a couple of articles first, and there are a lot more that I put in the description for this. Some very good, such as the Dylan Matthews article, but I'm not going to go through that one. I'm going to start with a piece from Dave Dayen. Sort of set the tone here. I'm not going to go through the whole thing on this either, but the title is Congress, Interlocking Crises in Congress Have Simple Solutions. And that was yesterday, September 27th, at the American Prospect. So there was the vote. It was the deadline for a vote. However, Nancy Pelosi said no. She wasn't going to bring it up for a vote because it just didn't have the votes yet. She was continuing to look around for the votes. She had been saying over the weekend that she was going soft on the linkage between the two bills, sending all kinds of signals that she was getting soft. But she did promise the frontline members in her caucus that she would not force them to vote on a bill that exceeds what can be passed in the Senate. And so Dave says Biden is forcing the conversation between the centrist Democrats in the Senate. And he's finally bringing the Manchin Dems towards a actually negotiating, instead of posturing. Until now, Manchin and Sinema have been posturing. But they're nowhere near a consensus, of course, on anything. Last Thursday, Pelosi and Chuck Schumer announced a deal on revenue pay-fors in the bill. For my money, part of the problem in passing these bills together has been that the centrists don't want any pay-fors, at all. And instead of taking them at their word and saying, okay, we'll give you no pay-fors as long as you give us all the other stuff that we want in this bill. Instead of making that kind of trade, they're insisting on pay-fors, even though a lot of them know by now that they could do a bill with not a lot of pay-fors in it. They probably only need something like 50%, okay, of pay-fors in the bill to be able to get it through reconciliation. But it seems like a lot of people on the left want to have these pay-fors. And the people they need to bring aboard to get the bill passed are trying to protect the money of their billionaires. Both Manchin and Sinema are being very, very stubborn about this. Sinema is resisting pressure at home, where people from the Democratic Party there are threatening to censor her if she doesn't start to support the Biden Build Back Better Act. So Pelosi couldn't carry out the vote on Monday, so she put out a Dear Colleague letter on Sunday night, and she'd set the actual vote for the infrastructure bill for Thursday. The same day, the surface transportation reauthorization that's attached to that bill expires. Some took this as a threat to whip the progressives in line, vote for infrastructure, or highway funding gets cut off. But this should all be seen as contingent on progress on the Build Back Better Act. But Pelosi won't bring Build Back Better on the floor unless it has the votes. There's no forcing mechanism available other than making a deal, Dave says. As we'll discuss in a moment, there's another must-pass bill due that day, Thursday, and any surface transportation extension can be stuffed into that if necessary. If progressives get a deal on Build Back Better, they'll vote for infrastructure. If they don't, there are other ways to make sure the highway funding doesn't lapse, and everybody knows it. And Pelosi's gambit is the kind of YOLO move you make when you have no other options. But the Biden agenda needs a breakthrough before it can move ahead for votes that can only happen with actual negotiations to build trust and find something agreeable to all sides. Breakthroughs in Washington always come right after the threats, but it's not going to happen overnight and not by whenever Pelosi has scheduled it on her calendar. In the Senate, meanwhile, there will be a vote late Monday afternoon on a House-passed bill. Now, it's Tuesday now, right? We know this bill didn't succeed. It was a bill to fund the government until the beginning of December, providing Hurricane Ida relief. It was also to allow for resettlement of Afghan refugees and also raise the debt limit. It was anticipated the bill would get 52 votes, which it did, because the senators from Louisiana, the two Republican senators, didn't dare vote against that bill because it was relief for them. But Senator McConnell made plain his desire to force Democrats to raise the debt limit on their own, so he wouldn't put any other Republicans in to vote for that particular bill. So it basically got blocked by the filibuster because it required 60 votes. They invoked the filibuster. Wasn't part of any reconciliation bill. Dave says appetite for U.S. debt is high and default is impossible in a country backed by its own currency. There's just this stupid law, which is contradicted by another law. The validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. So saith the 14th Amendment, but which nonetheless is held up as a tradition that says you have to set a threshold of public debt to cover spending already incurred. Failure to do so would cause a catastrophic default and painful economic recession. Setting this limit has never altered policy on spending in the history of the United States. It's a time bomb the Republicans like to light every time a Democrat takes the White House. Every time they have the opportunity to light the time bomb. Democrats want both parties to take responsibility for the debt limit, and they'd rather suspend it, which you can do under regular order, rather than setting it at a hard dollar amount, which is what you can do under reconciliation. And this is perceived as a more politically fraught vote. I'd argue that no politician has ever lost their seat over a debt limit vote. Washington has a lot of odd ideas about a lot of things. I'd argue the same way. No way they're going to lose their seats based on a vote to raise the debt limit. So it's really, the whole thing is really stupid. The idea of them suspending the debt ceiling again is really stupid, as we'll see later, because suspending the debt limit only brings it back again and again later for another fight and another crisis. We've been getting these crises now for 10 years. I'm getting pretty sick and tired of them. And the only way not to have them is to, there are a number of different ways not to have them, but suspending the debt limit for a while doesn't solve the problem, only makes the way for another crisis. Anyway, Democrats can pass a debt limit hike with 50 votes through reconciliation. It's a bit of a pain to do it. They'd have to amend the resolution instructions, budget resolution instructions. They have to spend a couple of weeks on floor votes getting it done. And they have to hope Republicans would not try to boycott a key budget committee hearing so they can get the fix on the calendar. Much easier resolutions have been inexplicably ruled out. The White House has ruled out the Treasury legally minting a large denomination platinum coin to cover the debt, or to just recognize a default on public debt as unconstitutional, which, given the 14th Amendment, it arguably is. I don't know if I agree with that entirely. It may be in certain situations unconstitutional because of the 14th Amendment, but I'll explain those situations to you later. These are seen as unserious options, even though the debt limit itself is the least serious law in U.S. history. It just shows it's all subjective, right? It depends on what they want to take seriously. That's what it's about. It's not about anything being unserious on its face. It's only unserious relative to the media, what they decide to laugh at and they don't decide to laugh at, and the people in both parties, in Congress. And Dave Dayen says, and I agree completely, if McConnell is telling Democrats to fix a debt limit on their own, they should actually fix it by eliminating it. The debt limit serves no purpose, is not a brake on spending, and just allows for financing of existing obligations. No one way of putting it out of its misery is any better than the other, but the grave for the debt limit must be dug. I'm not sure I agree with that either. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't be opposed if they voted to get rid of the debt limit. They passed it. I would not be opposed to that. But I got to point out, that is not a fix for austerity politics. That is not a fix for the kind of debt, terrorism that Manchin and the Peterson Foundation and Sinema are talking about each day. If we eliminate, just get rid of the debt ceiling, yeah, that's going to get rid of these crises, but it doesn't get rid of the debt terrorism too. Now, of course, first things first, it's important to get rid of the crises. So it would be good if they do that. But this is an opportunity also to get rid of deficit terrorism and austerity politics. And I think that's very, very important to do. And I'd like to see that done as well. And by the way, that's what the coin offers. The coin offers that kind of possibility, not just any coin. I mean, $1 trillion coin or $1 trillion or $2 trillion coin, probably not going to do that by itself. But there are coin options that will do that. And we'll talk about those, but first I want to share another piece. Yes, I didn't realize it. I did share it. That's by Ryan Cooper from September 24th, 2021. And he says America has two more looming crises to add to our pile. In addition to climate change, galloping Republican extremism, income inequality, and the ongoing global pandemic, the U.S. is close to breaching the debt ceiling and shuttering our own government. Happily, these problems are comparatively easy and simple to fix. Dems just need to amend the filibuster to create a loophole for matters related to the debt ceiling and continuing resolutions. If getting rid of the filibuster entirely is the nuclear option, think of this as a mini nuke that could save Democrats a major headache, stave off an economic apocalypse. The Republicans will whine. This isn't a radical idea. In fact, they did something similar themselves. So, scrolling down, at the same time, the government's nearing a shutdown because it's so dysfunctional. Congress almost never passes regular order budgets anymore. That's due to Mitch, by the way. Almost solely due to Mitch. Instead, we get continuing resolutions about once a year, which are required to keep normal government operations going. That is, those are money bills. They keep the normal operations going. On October 1st, the current resolution will expire, and the government will grind to a halt. Well, the House has passed a continuing resolution to fund the government and suspend the debt ceiling until after the 2022 election. See, they're suspending it again, so it would come back. It's not much, but at least it's something. Unfortunately, this bill is subject to normal Senate rules, which means it can and will be filibustered. And it was filibustered. It was filibustered yesterday and defeated. He points out Democrats could get around that roadblock with a reconciliation bill, but that process is likely too long to complete before a shutdown begins. But 51 votes can quickly change the rules of the Senate. Democrats could vote to amend the filibuster, so continuing resolutions and debt ceiling bills like the one in the House can pass with a simple majority vote. Dems passed just such an amendment in 2013 regarding federal judges, and Republicans did the same in 2017 regarding Supreme Court justices. It would take a few minutes, tops. And the need is urgent. As Jeff Stein writes to the Washington Post, economists estimate a prolonged impasse over the debt ceiling would cost the U.S. economy up to 6 million jobs, wipe out as much as $15 trillion in household wealth, and send the unemployment rate surging to roughly 9%. And these idiots are playing games, right? And as the Post Greg Sargent adds, if Republicans reclaim the House and or Senate in midterms, they virtually guaranteed take the debt ceiling hostage to force concessions from President Biden. That's what they did in 2011, 2013, and the GOP is dramatically more radical today than it was then. Democrats would be wise to abolish the debt ceiling now, instead of merely suspending it till Republicans are back in charge. But no, they can't think of that, the Democrats. Now, there are other potential solutions to these problems. The debt ceiling could be bypassed by minting $1 trillion coin. Only problem with that is minting $1 trillion coin would take care of the current debt ceiling crisis. But what happens if the Republicans come back in 2023? Then there's going to be another debt ceiling crisis because $1 trillion platinum coin is not enough, Ryan Cooper. Biden can simply declare the ceiling unconstitutional. He could, and there are other things he can do too, which we'll go over in just a few minutes. But Ryan Cooper points out, nor are government shutdowns legally necessary. They're the result of a legal opinion from former President Jimmy Carter's Attorney General, Benjamin Civiletti, about the 1870 Anti-Deficiency Act. Before 1980, if Congress passed the budget on time, and it often did, government agencies just kept going on their previous funding track without a shutdown. Biden needn't be bound by Civiletti's hair-splitting, hyperliteral memo about an anti-corruption law that never specifically addresses a congressional failure to pass a budget. Those are real options, but Democrats would be better served by the bigger and wholly feasible fix. Any self-respecting legislature would not possibly allow itself to be snarled up by its own goofy rules like this. Denmark technically has a debt ceiling, for example. But the Danish parliament keeps it far above the existing quantity of debt. The explicit intent of this move, supported incidentally by all the major parties in the Danish parliament, was to ensure that the Danish debt ceiling remained far in excess of outstanding debt and would never play a role in day-to-day politics. Sensible people, those Danes, but you wonder why they have a debt ceiling at all. As far as I know, there are only 3 modern countries that have a debt ceiling. The United States, the Danes, and Poland. I'm not sure what goes on in Poland. Anyway, that was a quote, that last, from Jacob Funk the Kierkegaard. Ryan Cooper comes back and says, that's how you deal with a silly technical triviality causing endless, needless problems, by fixing it. Stumbling from crisis to crisis, artificially contrived by arbitrary rules that could change at any moment, makes the Congress of the United States an international laughing stock. Just writing about this stuff is exhausting. And this was a pretty short block too, wasn't it? The filibuster remains because a handful of Senate Democrats nonsensically insist it's a cherished tradition. It isn't. Or that it enables bipartisanship. It doesn't. But we must keep the filibuster. Why not make this small tweak and diffuse the political pipe bomb Congress puts under its own hard quarters? Come on, Senators Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. Why not take some pride in your position and wield some power? Why not try governing? Somehow, I don't think those characters are going to hear that very much. Okay, now let's get down to some serious stuff. Let's see. Elvira Mahalko says, there's no debt crisis. That's bull. And Evelina says, they're getting away with it. Kay says, we need more than $1 trillion coin. And Elvira says, McConnell is full of caca. Haven't heard that word in a little while. Evelina says, hashtag censor cinema. Okay. Let's see, do we have any YouTube people here tonight? I believe Lana was here earlier. Yeah. And Steve Gonzo was here. Not too many comments from our YouTube contingent tonight. Anyway, next thing I want to share is, do I really want to share it? I don't know. I will share some of it probably, but not the whole thing. Okay. Anyway, on to the best immediate solution to the debt ceiling crisis. First of all, it's here. Okay, remember a few months ago in June, I warned against the debt ceiling crisis coming up. Then, in June, in the context of having a few months to handle it, I offered 4 solutions. I said they could repeal the law specifying a debt limit. That's what Ryan Cooper was talking about and Dave Dayen was talking about. They could mint a 1-ounce platinum coin with a face value of $100 trillion. They could implement overt congressional financing, or OCF. That's where Congress gives orders to the Fed to place the amount of an appropriation into the Treasury spending account, and where it also gives orders to the Fed to put in a sufficient amount of money to cover any debts that have to be repaid along with the interest on those debts during the fiscal year of the order. And 4, it was possible for Congress to restructure the Federal Reserve so it was under the direct authority of the Secretary of the Treasury. I offered those 4 solutions. Okay. I really didn't expect either overt congressional financing to go anywhere. I didn't expect putting the Federal Reserve under the Treasury to go anywhere. I was kind of hoping that Biden could see his way clear to defusing the debt ceiling crisis by minting the 1-ounce platinum coin, or see his way clear to getting all the Democrats together to do a carve-out on the filibuster and repeal the law specifying the debt limit. I prefer minting the platinum coin. I'm going to tell you why later. Now we're in the middle of the big crisis, the debt ceiling crisis. A number of solutions are being offered in the media, both mainstream and alternative. Before taking them up, I'm going to summarize the situation. Okay, the Treasury predicts it will default sometime between October 15th and maybe November 15th. That's probably a pretty good estimate. Sometime during that period, the Treasury won't be able to pay the debt that's due. Its balance in the Treasury spending account will be too low to continue paying on its debts. The federal government is prohibited from defaulting on its debts, however, by Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. If you recall, Dave Dayen mentioned this. Also, since Congress is empowered by Article 1, Section 8 to create federal money, it has the authority and the obligation to create a money itself, to order the executive branch or the Fed to create it by adding reserves to the Treasury spending account, or Congress could repeal the debt ceiling law ending the crisis in order to comply with the 14th Amendment. More bullet points in summarizing the situation. The Fed also is obliged to add reserves to the Treasury spending account since it has the authority to do that. Okay, when I say it's obliged, I mean if it wants to avoid a default, which the chairperson of the Fed and all the Fed officers are sworn to uphold the Constitution just like everybody else, so they have an obligation to support the 14th Amendment, Section 4, which means they can't allow the Treasury to go bust so it can't pay debt. So the Fed would be obliged to add reserves to the Treasury spending account. The Treasury itself is obliged to cause the Fed to add reserves since it has the authority to do that. Wait a minute, under what authority? Under the authority provided by the platinum coin. So all three are obliged by the 14th Amendment to avoid default by doing what each can to add those reserves or cause them to be added by others. In addition, every federal office holder is obliged by their oath of office to uphold the Constitution and do whatever they can to uphold the prohibition of the 14th Amendment, Section 4, being you can't go into default on your debts. You must pay your debts. Yet, there is gridlock in Congress and the executive as the date of default grows ever closer. What is wrong with them? What is wrong with them? Here are some immediate solutions from the Congress that the Congress could take. They could repeal the debt ceiling law, so there is no debt limit anymore. They could suspend the debt limit for a period of time, allowing the Treasury to issue more debt and resetting the limit to whatever the debt is at the time of the expiration of the suspension. That's what they just got through doing as of July 31st. That was the time of the expiration of the suspension, and that's what has created this growing crisis since. They can raise the debt limit so high that it will never be reached for a very long time. This is the Denmark case. I don't know what they're doing in Poland. Also, yet another solution is they could set the debt limit to whatever the outstanding debt is at any time, so the debt limit is never breached. In other words, it may be reached, but it's never breached. This is a proposal by David Super, who's a professor at Georgetown Law. Now, funny thing about him, he's in the Federalist Society. So even somebody from the Federalist Society is saying, let's get rid of this damn debt limit law. It's insane. Anyway, let's go into detail about each of these options. The reason the debt ceiling law was passed in 1917 was to grant the executive greater spending flexibility while still limiting war spending is now gone. Also, the president is limited in spending to congressional appropriations and repaying debt. So there are limits on the president, even without this debt ceiling law. So the only rationale for retaining it is for one political party or the other to use it as a bargaining chip to get what it wants. The debt ceiling law will probably take an afternoon to repeal. So why don't the Dems, who have control of both houses in the presidency, just do it and go ahead with the things they want to do? Well, first, because both parties like periodically to cry poverty, to pretend the government is running out of money. Debt ceiling crises give them an opportunity to posture about the deficit and debt, and then pivot to austerity policies that will please their donors. Also, the reason why they can't do what I just suggested they do is because the Republicans will block any attempt by Democrats to do this by invoking the filibuster. We just saw this just yesterday when they did just that as part of their law to get a continuing resolution going to fund the government. There was also that little item in it that was going to suspend the debt ceiling for a while. And the Republicans blocked that because the debt ceiling element was in that, and they blocked it by invoking the filibuster. Dems can put the repeal in a reconciliation bill, and then it wouldn't be subject to the filibuster, but it is questionable whether they can get one ready before default actually arrives. John Yarmouth thinks there isn't time. Even if there were, this alternative doesn't get rid of the political problems of the debt level and the debt to GDP ratio, and using these to play austerity politics. Why John Yarmouth doesn't think there isn't time is because to go back and put the repeal in the reconciliation bill involves a lot of procedural stuff that takes time. I left a link to an article from a roll call that goes through the whole procedural rigmarole for you so you can understand at length why there's no time to get the repeal into a reconciliation bill right now. There are also problems that may come up with the parliamentarian in putting through another reconciliation bill. You might also ask, why wasn't a debt ceiling provision, in other words, a provision to repeal the debt ceiling, why wasn't that put into the reconciliation bill they're considering right now, the Build Back Better bill? Wouldn't that be one way to build back better? It would be, only the Democrats preferred to have the debt limit repealed by a bipartisan bill. They thought they would be able to force the Republicans to act in a bipartisan manner by coupling the repeal of the debt ceiling to other spending that was a must for everybody, including the Republicans. Well, guess what? Mitch and the Republicans told them to go fly a kite, and they defeated that bill just yesterday. Even if there were time, however, to pass such a bill, this alternative, repealing the debt ceiling law, doesn't get rid of the political problems of the debt level and debt to GDP ratio, and conservatives in both parties using these to play austerity politics with the rest of us, to plead poverty all the time, which of course you know they do very well. Now, the next solution, you could spend the debt limit, you could suspend the debt limit temporarily. You could suspend it for a period of time, allowing the Treasury to issue more debt and resetting the limit to whatever the debt is at the time of expiration of the suspension. That's what Congress has lately been doing, but it's subject to all the objections that were mentioned above for repealing the debt ceiling, including failure to get rid of the basis for political debt terrorism and austerity politics, that is the debt level and the debt to GDP ratio. When I say the debt level, well, you know the debt level is $28 trillion some odd right now. A lot of people still worry about that $28 trillion figure because a lot of other people are telling them their grandchildren are going to have to pay it back if we don't do something about it now. Of course, this is total and complete nonsense, but there are billions of dollars behind trying to continue to sell this nonsense to the American people. And we know how hard it is to get around the propaganda. We know how hard it is to get around to the propaganda. We just recently saw how hard it is in Nina Turner's campaign, when she was basically beaten by scare propaganda from the Israel lobby. In addition, this kind of solution, that is suspension of the debt ceiling, just sets the stage for another crisis down the road. We're having a crisis now. We don't want to have another one down the road. We want this to be the last debt ceiling crisis. Well, here's one that'll get you there. We can raise the debt limit to a level never to be reached. Raise the debt limit to a level so high that it will never be reached for a very long time to come. For example, we could raise the debt limit to $2 quadrillion. $2 quadrillion. Why don't we pass that? That would be subject to the objections that were mentioned above for repealing the debt ceiling, except for the objection of creating another crisis down the road. But it would still include the failure to get rid of the basis for political debt, terrorism, and austerity politics. The debt level and the debt to GDP ratio. Those things are still there. They can propagandize on those things, scare people to death, and it's going to be some time before the public is educated enough in MMT to know that this stuff is just nonsense. And the next solution is David Super of Georgetown's. You can set the debt limit to the level it is currently at. Set the debt limit to whatever the outstanding debt is currently, so the debt limit automatically changes and the ceiling is never breached. It's reached, but it's never breached. This is like repealing the debt ceiling law entirely, but it leaves the people who pass it a vanishingly small, quote, fig leaf, unquote, as in, quote, it is false to say we got rid of the debt limit entirely, when all we did was to play a semantic game to stop it from being breached. Subject to all the objections mentioned above for repealing a debt ceiling except creating a crisis later, but including the failure to get rid of the basis for political debt, terrorism, and austerity politics, the debt level, and the debt to GDP ratio. So those are congressional solutions. It's really hard to get congressional solutions sometimes, as we're seeing this week, as we're seeing now. Everybody is so divided. It's really tough. Very few people are talking about, well, I guess they are starting to talk about emergency presidential options. So let's look at 4 of these. Of course, there's invoking the 14th Amendment, Section 4, just continuing to issue debt after claiming that the debt ceiling law is unconstitutional, trying to force the Congress to take the executive branch up to the Supreme Court, where hopefully the Supreme Court would decide that the debt ceiling was unconstitutional. Then there's a second thing that was put together by some cute lawyers, simply declaring, not invoking the 14th Amendment directly, but just declaring that breaching the debt ceiling is the least worst or the least best unconstitutional option. In other words, well, I'll explain it in a minute. Third, using novel debt instruments that don't conflict with the debt ceiling law. Oh, yes, we can think of some of those, and I'll be talking about them a little later. And then the final option, minting the $100 trillion coin, which I'll go through in some detail in just a few moments after I dispose of the first 3. So, the first is invoking the 14th Amendment, Section 4. Quoting Section 4, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payments of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned, unquote. The idea is that the debt ceiling law is unconstitutional because it creates the possibility of a default. Therefore, it questions the validity of the public debt, which, according to the 14th Amendment, may not be questioned. Not even Congress could question it. Not even Congress people can question it. Not even the president can question it. None of them can question it. Well, why is it that everybody is questioning it now? They're all questioning it. Anyway, this isn't enough. The debt ceiling law must actually be preventing the president from fulfilling his obligations before it can be invoked. So if the president wants to invoke the 14th Amendment to justify continuing to spend, he has to be out of other options. It has to actually be preventing him from fulfilling his obligations. So going into this in a little more detail, the president can't validly claim that there's a conflict between his duty to spend the mandated appropriations, his duty to prevent default on U.S. debts, and his duty to uphold the debt ceiling law, as long as he has what appear to be several legal options to enable him to spend those appropriations. We're going to mention at least two here. If the president refuses to implement any of these and uses his constitutional authority to avoid the default, he cannot invoke the 14th Amendment. But if he refuses to implement these, then he cannot invoke the 14th Amendment. On the contrary, he or she is obligated by the amendment to exhaust all of the options before taking action on the basis that the debt ceiling law is preventing him from fulfilling his mandate. As long as those options exist and are untried by him, it is not preventing him from fulfilling his mandates. Which brings us to the least unconstitutional option, the second possible solution for a president. The president has three mandates from Congress: to spend what Congress appropriates, to tax what Congress appropriates, and to adhere to the limits on issuing debt that Congress has set. When the president reaches the debt limit, I should have said when the Treasury reaches the debt limit, he or she may not be able to both adhere to the limit and to continue fulfilling Congress's spending and taxing mandates. Well, what if the president starts prioritizing spending, saying some spending is more important than other spending, so he's going to do that spending, but he's not going to do the other spending? If he does this, if he prioritizes spending, that's usurping Congress's spending power, because the president would be cutting spending in a unilateral way. Similarly, raising taxes usurps the taxing power of Congress, and ignoring the debt ceiling usurps its power to set debt limits. Now, this is an argument, by the way, of two professors from, I believe it's George Washington, specifically Buchanan and Dorff. I believe they're from GW, not from Georgetown, but I may be mistaken. Two, more on the least unconstitutional option. Also, the executive can argue that in appropriating spending after it has set a debt limit, Congress has implicitly mandated any further debt issuance that may be necessary for the Treasury to fulfill its spending mandate. Now, you heard what I'm saying. If the debt limit has already passed and is in place, and it's setting a specific debt limit, and Congress goes ahead and appropriates but new money, which may produce deficit spending, then Congress is basically implicitly saying, well, I'm now mandating the president to spend a lot more, which is certainly going to require more debt issuance. So implicitly, I am mandating that further debt issuance, whether or not it exceeds the debt limit. In other words, I am in fact repealing the debt limit. I'm not setting up a new debt limit or saying anything about a new debt limit, but I'm saying that Congress is mandating further spending regardless of the debt limit. So the conclusion is, therefore, the least, okay, I'm not sure that this last argument was made in the Buchanan-Dorff stuff. I don't believe I saw them say that, but to me that seems logical. Therefore, the least unconstitutional of the three options facing the executive is to breach the debt ceiling and fulfill Congress's taxing and spending mandates. Well, that certainly seems very sensible to me, but okay, I think it is, after all, in a way, invoking the 14th Amendment as well. In other words, there's something unconstitutional there. They're saying it is unconstitutional. Why would it be unconstitutional? Because of the 14th Amendment, Section 4. So there it is. What about using novel debt instruments that don't conflict with the debt ceiling law? Well, Beowulf, Carlos Mucha, his actual name is a lawyer who was the first to suggest using trillion-dollar platinum coins. Now, he's also spoken on this subject, and here he's offered an option for getting around the debt ceiling by issuing consols. These are debt instruments promising a fixed rate of interest in perpetuity, but never a principal repayment at a maturity date. In other words, somebody buys $1 million console. Okay? In buying that console, there is no promise made by the Treasury to ever return the $1 million, to ever pay it back. What is promised, however, is that the Treasury will pay a fixed rate of interest forever. A fixed rate of interest forever. So you and your heirs get that fixed rate of interest for years and years and years, for a century, for 2 centuries, for 3 centuries, so as long as the government of the United States exists. Well, the funny thing is, the debt ceiling law is written in such a way that what counts against the limit is the principal repayment guaranteed by the instrument. In fact, the specific level of debt is all the principal values outstanding that have not been repaid by the Treasury Department. Add all of those, and you get the level of the debt, the $28 trillion. If some console has been issued in the past, the value of those consoles, the principal amount of those consoles, would not be in that $28 trillion. It wouldn't have been counted in the $28 trillion. Since consoles provide no principal repayment, one can have unlimited issuance of consoles, perpetuals they're also called, without increasing or breaching the debt subject to the limit. Because the debt subject to the limit is defined as the sum of all the principal values of debt instruments outstanding. Neat, right? It's a neat way around it. It's legal. It's inconvenient, though, because the Treasury Department would have to keep on issuing consoles to do mandated spending till Congress finally decided to raise the debt limit. And they might never raise the debt limit again because they might want to buy these consoles and have guaranteed income from the government of the United States forever. Who knows? I don't know what the impact of the consoles would be. I do know that Britain issued perpetual bonds for quite a while during the 1800s, and I believe even in the 1700s they did this, and that some of those perpetuals are still there. And the interest on the perpetuals keeps on accruing to the accounts of the aristocrats who bought them in the first place. I'm not sure consoles is a good idea for a democratic republic, but they would be perfectly legal, perfectly possible. Then we get to the fourth solution, which the president would be able to implement. Under a law passed in 1996, Congress gave the Treasury Secretary the authority to order the Director of the U.S. Mint to both create 1-ounce platinum coins and specify their face value, also their composition too, but they have to be platinum to some degree, at his or her discretion. So a coin with an enormous dollar value can be created. This power has never been used since 1996. Once it's minted, such a coin would be carried to the New York Regional Fed Bank and deposited in the Mint's Public Enterprise Fund account. Now comes an important concept, the coin seigniorage. What is coin seigniorage? It's the difference between the cost of coins created by the government and the face value of the coin when accepted by someone. So for example, let's say you have a $50 coin and it only cost the mint to mint the $50 coin, let's say it cost them 19 cents. Then the seigniorage would be the difference between the face value of 50 cents and the cost of 19 cents. It's 31 cents. So the seigniorage is the profit in the coin. When the Fed accepts deposit of a new coin produced by the Treasury Department, it always credits Treasury with its face value. Costs about $3,500 to mint and transport a 1-ounce platinum coin with a face value of $100 trillion. Okay, the difference is the profit in the coin seniorage. That is nearly the full $100 trillion. So now the public enterprise fund account of the mint, where the coin was deposited by the mint, has $100 trillion, has roughly $100 trillion, including the seniorage in it. But guess what? By law, the Treasury Secretary can sweep the public enterprise fund account of the mint for the seniorage at its discretion and place the seniorage in its primary spending account. So in this example, if there was nothing in the public enterprise fund account prior to depositing the $100 trillion coin, then the Treasury could sweep all of the value of the coin except for the $3,500 that was used to mint and transport it. That would still stay in the public enterprise fund account. All the rest would be swept into the primary spending account of the Treasury Department. If the administration wanted to do this, it can get $100 trillion into its spending account within 3 days. I'm giving it a lot of time to get the coin up to New York. I figure they're going to want a big armored truck with full of soldiers surrounding it to drive that coin up to New York and into the New York Fed. Get it into the New York Fed. Armored cars, the whole shebang. But Treasury can't spend the $100 trillion immediately. It can fill its purse, that is the Treasury spending account, but Congress still and always has the purse strings. Treasury, however, can use the funds to deficit spend previously enacted congressional appropriations and repay debt as it falls due. And this is enough to resolve debt ceiling crises. Certainly is. In fact, if it repays the debt as it falls due, a very huge portion of that debt, all short-term debt, would be paid off in the first year. Trillions of dollars would be paid off in the first year. I haven't computed exactly how many trillions, but in the first 6 months, I expect it would be $6 to $7 trillion right then and there. And there's a lot of one-year debt too. So by the end of the first year, it might well be that half of the Treasury debt would be repaid. No longer $28 trillion, now $14 trillion. Well, this is enough to resolve debt ceiling crises. Because after all, if we have a debt limit now of $28 trillion and $14 trillion is paid off in the first year, then the Treasury Department can, if it wants to, issue more debt. It's got a lot of room. It's got a lot of room between the level of the debt, which would then be $14 trillion, and the debt ceiling. Suddenly, the debt ceiling would be so far up there, it wouldn't be reached in years. Since the issuance of debt by that time would be entirely voluntary. It wouldn't be about trying to fill the Treasury spending account. And also, minting a $100 trillion coin changes the background of politics by providing for relatively rapid payoff of the debt subject to the limit without balanced budget creating recessions. If such a coin were used, there would be no more austerity talk and no questions about, quote, how you're going to pay for it, unquote. Since one can always answer, quote, well, once Congress funds it, then Treasury can get reserves in its spending account from the Fed through transferring existing reserves in other accounts, including its public enterprise fund account that was previously filled with high-value platinum coin seigniorage. Platinum coin seigniorage could have been used to resolve the debt ceiling crises of 2011 and 2012 to 13. We would have been spared later debt ceiling crises and budgetary, fiscal cliff, and government shutdown threats and crises, not to mention sequestration cuts, which certainly slowed down our recovery from the Great Recession and may well have contributed to the ugly mood in the country that gave us President Donald J. Trump. Could Republicans and corporatist faux fiscal responsibility Democrats really have insisted on federal government deficit reduction with national debt quickly shrinking and $93 trillion in the bank? Which gets us to the point about the platinum coin. Most people, and most in Congress, believe the myth that government can only tax and borrow. And that's still true today. A majority of people in Congress still probably believe the myth that government can only tax and borrow. That myth makes it credible when leaders in Congress and the president say the U.S. is, quote, running out of money, as Obama said. And, quote, we can't afford, unquote, whatever. We can't afford nice things. But would they be credible if there were 93T in the Treasury spending account? Could Manchin, Sinema, and the others say no to solving serious problems by crying poverty then? I seriously doubt it. And for the more reflective among them, to learn the lesson that the debt was never a bona fide financial issue, but always a political one caused by the failure of most to understand the fiscal power of a monetarily sovereign government to repay its own debt instruments as they fall due, and the willful intent of others, including noted economists. I'm talking to you, Paul Samuelson, to lie, of course, Paul Samuelson is no longer with us, to lie about the fiscal capabilities of the government for a variety of reasons. So I suppose I can say, I'm talking to you, Paul Krugman. At that point, and even before that for many people, we will see the end of austerity politics, periodic debt ceiling crises, fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budgetary crises. The $100 trillion coin directly ends debt ceiling crises because the debt is no longer relevant, except as a constantly shrinking obligation that will be paid off as it falls due. More on the end of austerity politics. As for fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budgetary crises, their justification is primarily in the false claim that the U.S. is running out of money and must slow the growth of the national debt enough to allow the debt to GDP ratio to shrink so that we can't afford to implement the deficit spending that may be necessary to create full employment, pass Medicare for all, and do other things that a majority of the population supports heavily but does not insist upon in the face of supposed budget problems. There would be no fiscal cliff, sequesters, or budget crises without the claim that there is a government budget constraint, a GBC. Once we dispel that claim with the $100 trillion coin, these things will be gone with the wind. And a new set of hopefully more fruitful problems will emerge for us to consider. Don't you just look forward to that time? I look forward to these new problems, the real problems posed by the need to win debates with conservatives about the likely real effects of fiscal policy on public purpose rather than the faux problems of imaginary fiscal constraints giving rise to neoliberal austerity. Grappling with and solving them will be a great step forward for American democracy. So, given the political context, which of these solutions is best? Well, it looks like the time for a Congress-based solution is gone. It looks like there's not enough time to put together a reconciliation bill to get such a solution done. It still doesn't look like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are ready to do a carve-out of the filibuster so the debt ceiling can be repealed. That doesn't look like it's very favorable. Now, maybe the other Democrats will get him to do that. I don't know. But assuming they don't, I'm pretty sure, I do know, and I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen. But stranger things have happened. If it doesn't happen, then the political platinum coin seniority solution is the fastest and best, because it only requires action by the president. In 2013, the Fed reportedly objected to the coin proposal. However, the Fed Enabling Act says that in cases of dispute over financial interpretations, the Fed chair must obey the secretary. By the way, Jay Powell is coming up very soon for a reappointment. I don't think that he's going to want to object to the coin proposal. By the way, if the Fed chair refuses to obey the secretary, then the president can fire the Fed chair for cause before Jay Powell's term is even up. And of course, that would kill any possibility of a reappointment. It's also true the sole alternative leaves intact debt terrorism and austerity politics. So the best immediate solution is the $100 trillion coin, because implementing it requires only the executive, and because it ends debt terrorism and austerity politics once and for all. So I say, and you've heard this before because I discussed debt ceiling crises before. I talk about how to get rid of debt ceiling crises. So you've heard this last one before. But it's an appropriate conclusion to this. Take away the Hunger Games. So Joe Biden, don't wait any longer. The crisis is upon us and your administration. Defang Ted Cruz, Mitch McConnell, John Cornyn, Rand Paul, Lindsey Graham, Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, Chris Coons, John Tester, and the rest of the Hunger Gamesters of both parties. Take away the Hunger Games now and forever. Politically enable the rest of your economic agenda. Build enough political credit to pass the Build Back Better Act, the Voting Rights Act, hashtag Medicare for All, student debt elimination, the Green New Deal, and the Job Guarantee. Mint the $100 trillion coin. End the Hunger Games now and forever. So I hope you liked that. I'm now going to take your comments. Solana says the elected officials And their media love the debt ceiling, gives more opportunities for drama. Of course, they're all drama queens. Elvira says, I want to fire Cinema, Manchin, McConnell, Pelosi, and a lot of the others. Me too. Unfortunately, it's up to their electorates to fire them. People in Kentucky had a chance to fire Mitch last year. They didn't take it. Part of the reason why they didn't take it is because Chuck Schumer decided to run by Amy, what's her name again? He decided to run Amy, what's her name again? And she, of course, was absolutely the wrong choice. She blew something like $88 million on that campaign. But there's worse. There's worse. There's worse. They supported Jamie Harrison, okay, the DNC did, in South Carolina, trying to unseat Lindsey Graham, one of the worst offenders in the Republican Party. Jamie spent $110 billion, $110 million, and was rewarded for his great efforts. Got beaten by 20 points. He was rewarded for his great efforts by becoming the chairperson of the Democratic National Committee. Can you imagine that? They let him be the DNC chairman. I guess they thought he was a good fundraiser because he wasted $110 million. Sorry, I'm getting my millions, billions, and trillions mixed up here. It's very funny. Then they wasted another $70 million on Sarah Gideon up in Maine, who should have had no trouble at all replacing the washed up Susan Collins. But no, Sarah Gideon failed too. I mean, those people blew what was $260 million on 3 Senate races, in which all of them, they nominated the wrong candidates. They took basically centrist Democratic candidates for the Senate, and they couldn't beat the righty Republicans who ran against them, the righty incumbents, okay, who ran against them. That was a bloody scandal. Kay says, we need D.C. to be a state. That would give us a couple of progressive senators. I don't know that they'd be very progressive. They'd probably just vote along with Chuck Schumer. Evelyn says, off subject, does anyone know anything about Apple and Android devices becoming inoperative as of September 30th? Well, I certainly hope that doesn't happen, because I've got 2 iPads here and an iPhone. I'd like to be able to use them. Fortunately, I don't have an Android operating system for my computer. Kay says, don't know anything about that. Evelina says, there was a notice on FB. Kay says, will that affect you? Something to do with the new security operational system. Sandy Dagg, hi Sandy, says, I have not heard anything. Kay says, bipartisan is a joke on us, you mean. Sandy Dagg says, R&D's working together. Henry Gustav says, how many disasters can Americans take without their own government causing another disaster on purpose? Shake my damn head. Sandy Dagg says, quadrillion works for me. Steve says, 0. Never let a good crisis. You know the thing. Yeah, I know the thing. Never let a good crisis go to waste. That was Rahm's thing. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And Lana says, hi, Henry. Hi, go start. And Henry says, hi, Lana. And hi, go start. And Lana says, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe and the share button, please. Elvira Mahalko says, the 3.5T isn't even a lot of money, and it is also spread out over 10 years. Now you see who didn't. Now you see who didn't. No, it's not a lot of money spent over 10 years. The Defense Department, if it keeps up its present pace, is going to spend $8 trillion over 10 years. Kay says, putting it off for a few months won't work for sure. Kay says, 3.5T is already paid for by raising taxes on the rich. Well, that's probably the problem, because the donors have got hold of some of the Democratic senators, and they won't let them vote for raising taxes. Maybe we get the 3.5 trillion in spending if we don't raise those taxes. Raise taxes separately in a taxing bill down the line, where people are taking votes only on the taxing bill. So they won't be able to muddy up the water by saying you're spending too much. Then it won't have anything to do with spending. That's why it's better to decouple these frickin' bills. Kay says GOP and corporate Dems don't want to raise taxes either. Kay says Biden is a gutless wonder. Well, and Shade says, hey, Lana, how's the new house? And Kay says, I'm getting cash out in case they put off Social Security checks in this mess. And Bonnie says, it can save the Postal Service. Yes, it can. Amy McGrath. That's right. Thank you, Elvira. It's Amy McGrath. And she says, hashtag Booker for Kentucky. Booker for Kentucky, indeed. If Booker had run in 2020 instead of Amy McGrath, and if they'd given Booker $88 million, he would have cleaned Mitch's clock. Totally. Mitch wouldn't be in the Senate any longer. Booker with $88 million against Mitch? Oh, boy. I think Booker with $40 million would have cleaned Mitch's clock. Hell, they could have saved $40 million and given it to Jamie Harrison. So he could have blown $150 million on that race. Lana says, hi, Shane. Please see previous comments. I'm not done moving yet, but so far I like the new house. Kay says, they make it way too confusing. And Shane says, that's great. That's great. Okay. Any other comments and questions? Because completely unexpectedly, I have caught up to you all by 10:30. I never thought that would happen. That Bonnie's shaking her head. That's a novelty. Oh, by the way, where's my red beret?
Over there. It's too late. You don't have to wear it all the time.
Oh, yes, I do. And any other comments? So I think Bonnie's going to get me my red beret so I can put it on in time to say goodnight. Thank you.
Welcome.
And Lisa checks in, says, hello, Joe. Hello, Lisa. Uh, and Lana said, did you see Rashida put up a tweet about minting the coin? I haven't had a chance to see that particular tweet yet, but of course, the ABC Act that she previously introduced with Jayapal was to be funded through minting $2.2 trillion coin. And Shane says, laugh out loud. And Lisa says, hello, Joe. Kay says, love these discussions. Thank you. Love you all. We love you, Kay. And Shane says, hey, Lisa. Lisa says, hi, Shane. And Lisa says, I missed it. Well, yeah, you come in at 10:30. You miss it. And Evelyn says, Dr. Joe, can we cover some international news as well again? There's lots going on. There's lots going on, Evelina. It's true. There's a lot going on with respect to the CIA story that they had plotted to actually assassinate Assange. They weren't satisfied with a slow assassination. They want to have a fast assassination. There, of course, the sanctions continue. The sanction regimes continue damaging the countries that they're aimed at in a very serious way. And Shane said, I missed half the show because I was on a date. Sorry about that, Joe. Shane, I'm happy to hear you were on a date. And Lisa says, I had a commitment. Well, that's okay, Lisa. And Lana says, Shane, good for you. You and Lisa can play this back later. We expect a full report. Laugh out loud. Okay, so there is a lot of international news to go over. But the stuff that's currently going on here is really, really important. Why is it so important? It is so important because if these measures fail and Biden comes up dry and there's a debt ceiling crisis to boot, and there's a default to boot. Yeah, the starvation of the NHS, that's also very, very bad. If all that happens, then we are going to be even further on the road to fascism here in this country, further on the road, okay, to the return of Donald Trump, because of the incompetence of this administration. The months and months of dawdling and dallying when it came to bipartisanship. On March 15th, when the American Rescue Plan got passed, work on the new reconciliation bill should immediately have started. There should have been no pre-compromise by the progressives. Biden should have come out with a $10 trillion bill to scare the pants off those people. Really, really scare the pants off them. And there should have been a full court press put on all of them that $10 trillion was going to pass. And that should have been finished. That bill should have been finished by June. Congress should have been held in session for that whole time until they passed those bills. Biden should really have played hardball with the progressives at his back. and we wouldn't be sitting in the place that we're in now, and Trump wouldn't be sitting in the place where he is now.
Virus.
And Steve says, New York's first female governor is about to fire 72,000 unvaxxed healthcare workers. Next up, an unvaxxed toddler to Gitmo. And Dolores says, thank you for a great discussion. It's always great to hear from everyone here. And Jesus says, did anyone hear Steve Grumbine's interview of John Yarmouth on macro and cheese? It was amazing. What a politician should be. Bye, everyone. Yes, Jesus, I did hear the interview of John by Yarmouth on macro and cheese. It was a very good interview. And it was great to see that the chairperson of the budget committee in the House had a good basic understanding, of MMT, really knew what he was doing. He is more than a match for Bernie Sanders, who's the chair of the Senate Budget Committee. So John Yarmouth, kudos to John Yarmouth, and kudos for the interview to Steve Grumbine. I don't normally send kudos to Steve Grumbine, but that certainly was a special interview. And Shane says, I will write you a 94.5-page essay. I know you have plenty of time to read it, Lana. And Dolores says, good night, everyone. See you tomorrow. Yes, I will see you tomorrow. I will be back tomorrow with Daniel Halid, who is from the student division of PNHP, and he is a supporter of the Red Berets. He is a Red Beret, and he is a supporter of state-based efforts, and I'll be talking to him tomorrow night. And that's going to be a good interview. And Lisa says, we are screwed if all that happens. We are. That's the most important thing going on in the world, actually, right now, because that's going to affect the whole world. Ghostart said, yep, great interview. Yarmouth rocks. And Lana says, Steve, yes, he does. And Shane says, my prediction is Kamala will run and lose. She's the most unpopular politician since Hillary Clinton, and that Trump will beat her. Sad to say, that's my prediction. I agree with you, Shane. I think that's what's going to happen. Lisa says, glad Hunter Biden does it again. Ending the filibuster becomes critical. It was critical earlier. If he had ended the filibuster and gotten the voting right things through right then and there in the early spring, a lot of the Republican voter suppression efforts would already have been blocked. Ghostart says 3 square blocks surrounding JA's embassy were entirely intelligence operatives, down to the trash men, the delivery drivers, the cops, etc. Ghostart says the Guccifer 2.0 equals SI #volt. Don't know what that means. And Shane says, Joe, I just learned about the theory called rules for rulers. Okay, are you familiar with that one? I don't know if I'm familiar with that one by that name, but you can certainly make me familiar with that one. Shane, Kay says Yarmouth is very good. And Lana says, Shane, agree about Kamala, but not sure Trump will be the R candidate. Well, if Trump is healthy, he's going to be the R candidate. There is no one to challenge him. There's no one who even has the guts to challenge him. And there's no one who has anywhere near the popularity he has with Republicans. So if he's healthy, if he's not in jail, he's going to run. Case RTD says, Joe, do you have a chance to see my interview with Sabby Sabs? No, Shane, I'm sorry. Today, I was completely occupied with preparing for tonight because, from my point of view, this was a very critical live stream. And it was just a very critical live stream because the key critical thing is not just getting the debt ceiling out of there. It is ending austerity politics too. And the only solution that's going to do that is the platinum coin solution. That's the only one. That's the best one. And people have to know it. They have to know it. They have to know it's there. They have to know Biden alone can do it. They have to know he's an idiot for not doing it. Shane says, if Trump runs, then he's the candidate. And Shane says, even if he just ends the filibuster for specific bills, voting rights bills. Yeah, if he does it for the voting rights bills, that would be very important. He obviously needs a carve-out for debt ceiling bills too, obviously. Evelyn says, Biden's mistaken foreign policy right now anticipates his plan for domestic. It's a terrible foreign policy. Kay says, I'm trying to check my voter registration, but don't really know what district I'm in anymore. Evelyn says, looking like failed domestic policy right now. Lana says, that will be a nice mess. Kamala versus Trump. Eye roll. If that happens, we're done for. We're done for as a species because Trump will win that. And he will not do a thing about the climate for as long as he is president. And really, it may not be possible for anyone who wants to do anything about the climate, okay, to become the president in any reasonable time after that. And because if Trump is president for 4 more years, they may have rigged the electoral system to such a degree that it would be impossible for a climate warrior to win. We would never be doing any green stuff. And Shane says, Trump cut Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz refused to endorse, and his biggest donor slammed a door in his face at the RNC in 2016. Then Cruz phone banked for him. Shane said, the left doesn't have a candidate right now. Warren burned her bridges. AOC isn't strong enough yet, and it's been disappointing. Nina is not completely trusted after joining TYT. Bernie is too old. Well, Shane, you could always support me. Shane says, we are fucked. Shane says, the left has no opposition, to Kamala. Yes, the left does. His name is Jeff Merkley. And he is a great guy. All he's got to do is grow a little charisma. If we can get him to grow some charisma, he'd really be good. Jeff votes with Bernie on just about everything. I mean, just about everything. Kay says Trump will kill us all. Yeah, probably he'll be happy to because he's old and only has a few more years. And Shane says, well, no inside the party opposition. Jeff Merkley. Gostard says C equals C, SCE, also yes in Spanish. I laugh out loud. I still don't understand what that meant, Steve. And Lana says, I like Yarmouth for president. Well, I'm not sure what his entire voting record is. He seems like a nice man, and he likes MMT, and he knows MMT now. And he's not going to be one of these damned fiscal responsibility mavens. But we need someone who is going to be good on foreign policy. We have to end this imperialist foreign policy now and become one of the nations of the world. We have to have a collaborative foreign policy. We have to work with other peoples and contribute to their aspirations, not simply our own. Shane says, guess I'll be voting green in the next election. Lana says, Ro Khanna. Yeah, maybe Ro Khanna, but I don't know if I trust Ro Khanna as much as I do Jeff Merkley. I mean, Ro Khanna sometimes does and says strange things such that you find yourself saying, what the hell is he thinking? I mean, what the hell is he talking about? What made him say that? Why is that in his mind? I mean, sometimes I get a strange sort of vibe, from Ro. But with Merkley, I never get a strange vibe. I just get a vibe of a nice, quiet guy who's trying to do the best he can and who never votes against the people's interest. That's what I like about him. And Shane says, Ro Khanna is decent, but he keeps going on lefty shows and making promises he knows he is unable to keep. Evelina says, Stephanie Kelton for Prez. Stephanie would be great on domestic policy. I haven't heard her talk on foreign policy yet. Oh, except for trade policy. I know she was certainly opposed to the trade agreements, but I just don't know where she stands when it comes to continuing the imperialist policies of the United States. That is awfully important. Shane says he goes on all the shows in a week and talks a good game. Shane says, but never follows through. Would I vote for him yet? Would I be enthusiastic? I don't think so. Yeah, and Lisa says, Ro needs to harden his spine, but he does care. Lisa says, we need to get on his staff, guys. Ghostart says, good night, all. P.S. You too, Shane. Hashtag until we meet again. And Evelina says, what does Evelina say? We need an economist for first woman president. We do. And if that were the only criteria, I'd certainly be in Stephanie Kelton's corner. No question about it. No question about that. But that foreign policy area is just an unknown for me at this point. And Lana says, off topic, Tom Hartman went on a rant today about conservative German leader Angela Merkel, more left than Sanders. I got to take a look at that rant. That's going to be an interesting rant. Okay, says not a big fan of Roe anymore. And Shane says, I've seen Roe go on TYT, Jimmy Dore, Rising, Katie Halper in a single week and say all the right things. It goes back to Congress and doesn't do what he says he's going to do. Lisa says, nice and quiet, will not do it though. Well, that's what I meant by Jeff actually growing some charisma. Right, nice and quiet is not going to do it. And Lana says, she agrees, not sure where Roe is sometimes. Ghostdot says, Guccifer 2.0 equals CIA. Even it says, so you think S. Kelton might be an imperialist? No, I don't think that. I mean, I don't think that Stephanie herself, okay, is an imperialist. But what I'm saying is, I don't know what a foreign policy would be like. You know, someone could become the president of the United States, a perfectly good person, very good on the economics, very good on the domestic front. But that person is going to have the capacity to face down the deep state, the foreign policy establishment, and the defense establishment. So that person who takes over as president, okay, at that time, is going to have to be a really, really strong person. Okay, I think that Bernie had the capacity to do that. I don't know whether Stephanie has the capacity to do that. I don't think her instincts and her orientation would be towards imperialism in foreign policy. But she would have to have the character of Barbara Lee in order to fight that foreign policy war. That's going to be a war. And Lisa says, yep, Ghost Start. Yes, Hartman was really good today. Ghost Start says, Rose straddling a barbed wire fence. Yeah, he's Silicon Valley, the representative from Silicon Valley. He's got to become the senator from California as soon as he can. Shane says, that's what worried me about Warren. I liked a lot her domestic policies, but when it came to foreign policies, she was a standard Democrat. Yes, okay. I think Stephanie has more steel than Warren. I do think that. And Lana says, agree, Steve. I like R. And Evelyn says, with the right team, she may be able to do it. Well, she's going to do it on the economic side because she's probably going to have Jamie Galbraith and Joe Stiglitz on her team there. So on the economic side, she's certainly going to have the right advisors. I don't know if she would be inclined to bring in foreign policy people like well, at this point, I don't even know who comes to mind. The foreign policy establishment has been so dominated for such a long time by the neoliberal people. It is just incredible. Would she have the stones to bring in Ed Snowden and make him the director of the CIA. How about that? Is anybody going to have the guts to do something like that? I don't know. Before you did something like that, you'd have to take quite a few heads at the CIA and get them out of there and change that network. Change that network. And Lana says, Roe, but like Joe said, there is a little uneasy feeling there. Evelina says, wow. All you've had at stake for years and years and years have been these neoliberal types at state. Who would you put in, at state? If Bernie Sanders did not run for president in 2024, maybe he could fill the shoes of the Secretary of State. But who can you think of with some international experience who is not a warmonger? I mean, years and years and years of warmongers, years and years and years of imperialists. I mean, where are the people to take over? Yeah, Max Blumenthal, Ben Norton. I mean, who are we looking at here? It's a tough call. I think you got to pick up people from the universities who've been hiding there for a while. People who might have some experience, but who know international relations very, very, very well. Shane says, Madeleine Hoffman for Secretary of State. Laughed my ass off. She was head of the New Jersey Peace Project. I think that would be daring to get a Green Party person. Certainly would be daring to get a Green Party person. And maybe Jill Stein for Secretary of State. Gorstott says, general strike seems inevitable once everybody's living on the street. Evelina says, brilliant. Ed Snowden to head the CIA. Well, he would be in constant fear of his life. First, you'd probably have to get rid of half the people in the CIA. Lana says, I like Madeleine. Shane says, you want to find good people, you have to look outside of the party. Yeah, you got to look outside of the party, but the question is where? And they have to be people who are really knowledgeable about international affairs and who have foreign affairs experience too. And Shane says, Madeleine is one of the KRTD media hosts. And Lana says, at Steve, our general strike conversation seems to have waned. I hope this is temporary. No, we'll be talking about general strikes a lot. And Evelyn says, except people would not trust him since he's been living, in Russia. That's probably true. Evelyn says, yes, Dr. Joe, in the universities. Ed Snowden for the CIA, Julian Assange for the FBI. You'd have a hard time finding a decent person for the FBI, too. Probably the best you could find there is someone who would be dedicated to the law and the fair administration of the law. Evelina says, yay, Julian. Okay, folks, it's about 11:02. I've come to the end of your comments again. Thank you all for the vigorous commentary over the last half hour. I'll see you tomorrow when Daniel Lead will be here. I think that's how he pronounces his last name, but we'll find out for sure tomorrow. And it says, in the meantime, I wish Biden would replace DeJoy. Yeah, well, Biden seems to work about 1/10 of a day, doesn't he? He certainly doesn't get a lot done. That's for sure. Sandy says, thank you, Joe, Bonnie, and everyone. Delana says, good night. Ghost Start says, United Corruption of America. Evelina says, good night, sleep tight all. And Shane says, Warren for Supreme Court Justice. Oh, you mean Elizabeth Warren? Yeah, that's another area. We have to be really careful about the choice of Supreme Court justices. And Shane says, she does know the law. Yeah, but which law? How is she on civil liberties? How is she on civil rights? I expect that she knows corporate law. I would expect that. I would expect her to be reasonably anti-corporation, but maybe not sufficiently anti-corporation. Shane says she's older and she isn't bad on the issue and she won't be there forever. On the other hand, we might want to have a really good young Supreme Court justice there who would be there forever, right? For a change, a young lion from the left. We haven't seen one of those on the court for a very long time. Kay says, good night all. I love you all. And we love you too, Kay. Thank you to everyone for coming. I am going to say good night now. Shane says maybe.